The silent colony, the frozen moon of Arcturus 7, had never been meant for greatness. It was a mining outpost, nothing more, where 12,000 humans scraped rare minerals from beneath layers of ice and rock. The colonists called their settlement Frostholm, and they were proud of what they had built in the harsh environment. Children played in pressurized tunnels while their parents worked the mines. Scientists studied the unique crystalline formations deep in the moon's core. It was hard work, honest work, and they were far from the politics and conflicts of the inner systems. Mining supervisor Thomas Park checked his environmental readings for the third time that morning. Everything was normal. The ice processors were running smoothly, converting frozen water into breathable atmosphere. Diffusion reactors hummed steadily, providing warmth against the negative 200-degree surface temperatures. His daughter Lily was at school, learning about Earth history from teacher Martinez. His wife Sarah was in the medical bay, treating a miner who had slipped on some ice. Just another day on Arcturus 7. The first sign of trouble came from deep space telemetry. Engineer Rita Nakamura noticed the gravitational anomaly before anyone else. 17 objects had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, moving in perfect formation toward the moon. She ran the signatures through the database. No matches. These ships were unlike anything in the human fleet registry or any known alien civilization. Rita sent an alert to Governor Michael Torres, who was eating lunch in his modest office. Governor Torres looked at the data and felt his sandwich turn to lead in his stomach. The ships were massive, each one dwarfing the largest human battlecruiser. They moved with purpose, ignoring the asteroid belt and heading straight for Arcturus 7. He activated the colony-wide communication system. His voice remained calm despite the fear growing in his chest. "This is Governor Torres. We have unidentified vessels approaching our position. All non-essential personnel report to designated shelter areas. This is a precautionary measure only." The Corvin ships arrived in orbit 3 hours later. They made no attempt to hide their presence, their hulls gleaming with an oily, organic sheen that seemed to absorb light. A communication channel opened, and the colony's main screen filled with the image of a being that made everyone who saw it step back instinctively. The Corvin commander had 6 eyes arranged in a circle around its head, each one blinking independently. Its voice came through the translator as a series of metallic clicks that somehow formed words. "Species identified as human. Your presence in this system violates Corvin expansion protocols. You have 1 rotation of your moon to evacuate. After that time, this world will be cleansed for proper colonization." The transmission ended before anyone could respond. Governor Torres immediately tried to re-establish contact, his hands shaking as he worked the controls. "Please, we can negotiate. This is a peaceful mining colony. We have families here, children. We mean no harm to your empire." The response came swift and cold. "The Corvin do not negotiate with lesser species. You are contamination. You will be removed. 1 rotation." Governor Torres turned to his staff, seeing his own desperation reflected in their faces. 1 rotation was 20 hours. They had 43 transport ships, each capable of carrying maybe 50 people if they packed them in like cargo. That was 2,000 people at most. They had 12,000 souls on Arcturus 7. Mining supervisor Thomas Park ran through the tunnels toward the school. Other parents had the same idea, creating a stampede of panicked adults. He found Lily in her classroom, teacher Martinez trying to keep the children calm while her own hands trembled. The children sensed something was wrong. Their young faces looked up at the adults with trust that made Thomas want to weep. He grabbed Lily and held her tight, whispering that everything would be fine, hating himself for the lie. The evacuation began immediately. Governor Torres established a lottery system, though he knew it was futile. Families with young children would get priority, along with essential personnel who could help establish a refugee camp elsewhere. The fight started within an hour. A man named Chen demanded his elderly mother get a spot. A woman named Foster insisted her technical skills made her more valuable than others. Security Chief Ramon Valdez had to stun 3 people who tried to force their way onto ships. Sarah Park worked in the medical bay, treating injuries from the panic while knowing she would never leave. She and Thomas had already decided. Their daughter would go on the last transport with teacher Martinez, who had volunteered to care for any orphans created by the evacuation. Sarah gave Lily a sedative, telling her it was vitamins so the girl would sleep through what was coming. She kissed her daughter's forehead one last time, memorizing the smell of her hair. Engineer Rita Nakamura wasn't running for the transports. Instead, she was in the communication center, setting up a complex array of quantum transmitters. If they were going to die, the universe would know what happened here. She began recording everything, using every satellite and probe in the system to document what the Corvin were about to do. Her hands flew across the controls, uploading terabytes of data to a specially shielded drone that would launch just before the attack began. The 20 hours passed like seconds and centuries simultaneously. The transport ships lifted off in waves, their engines straining against Arcturus 7's gravity. Thomas Park stood at the viewport watching his daughter's ship disappear into the black. Beside him, Sarah held his hand so tightly it hurt. Around them, 10,000 other colonists who hadn't made the lottery stood waiting. Some prayed, some sang, some simply held each other. Governor Torres made one final attempt at communication. "We have evacuated our children and 2,000 civilians. The rest of us remain. We are no threat to you. Please show mercy." The Corvin commander appeared on screen again, its 6 eyes focusing with what might have been curiosity. "You chose to stay? This is unexpected. Lesser species typically flee or beg." Torres stood straighter. "We stay because someone has to witness what you do here. Someone has to remember." The Corvin commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Memory is irrelevant." "You are irrelevant. Cleansing begins now." The bombardment started 30 seconds later. Beams of energy that seemed to bend reality itself struck the surface of Arcturus 7. Where they hit, matter simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly spherical voids. The ice plains vaporized. Mountains turned to dust. The careful pressurized tunnels that had taken decades to build were open to the vacuum of space. Thomas and Sarah Park died holding each other in the medical bay when a beam punched through directly overhead. They had enough time to look into each other's eyes before the air rushed out. Governor Torres managed to send one last message before the communication center was destroyed. His words would travel with Rita's drone racing across space toward Earth. "They killed us all. We were no threat. There were children here. Remember Arcturus 7, remember what they did. Avenge us." Rita Nakamura's drone launched as the colony's fusion reactors exploded, using the electromagnetic pulse as cover. It was small, shielded, and programmed to drift like debris until it was clear of the system. Then it would activate its quantum drive and race toward Earth with its cargo of horror. Rita died at her station, making sure the drone escaped. Her last thought was that someone would know, someone would care, someone would make the Corvin pay. The bombardment continued for 6 hours, long after any human could have survived. The Corvin were thorough, systematic, turning the mining colony into geometric patterns of destruction. When they were done, Arcturus 7 looked like it had been eaten by some vast creature, its surface pockmarked with perfect spheres of nothing. The Corvin ships turned and left the system, their commander already forgetting about the humans. They were just another infestation cleared, another world prepared for proper colonization. But in the void, a small drone drifted silently, carrying its message of death across the stars. It would take 3 weeks to reach Earth. 3 weeks for humanity to learn what had happened to 12,000 innocent souls whose only crime was existing in the wrong place. The Corvin Empire controlled 7,000 systems and had destroyed hundreds of species. They believed themselves untouchable, inevitable, the natural inheritors of the galaxy. They had no idea what they had just awakened. They had no concept of human rage, human determination, or human vengeance. They had killed 12,000 humans and orphaned 2,000 children. They had murdered parents who stayed behind so their children could escape. They had destroyed something precious and irreplaceable, and they had done it without care or consideration. The Corvin were about to learn that humans were not like other species they had conquered. Humans remembered. Humans adapted, and humans knew how to hate with a fury that could burn stars. The Reckoning Storm. The drone arrived at Earth during a routine Tuesday morning. Traffic flowed through the orbital lanes around humanity's birth world, while billions went about their daily lives. The message from Arcturus 7 was received by Deep Space Communication Station Alpha, where a technician named David Kim nearly dropped his coffee when he saw the priority markers. The quantum signature was emergency level red, the kind that meant disasters beyond imagination. David's hands trembled as he opened the data packet. 3 hours later, every human in the solar system had seen the footage. They watched 12,000 people die in real time, recorded by Rita Nakamura's satellites. They saw Thomas and Sarah Park's last embrace. They heard Governor Torres's final words. They saw children being sedated so they wouldn't understand why their parents weren't coming with them. The president of United Earth, Chen Wei-lin, called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. The chamber was silent as they watched the complete recording for the second time. Defense Minister Alexander Volkov was the first to speak. His voice was soft, dangerous. 7,000 systems. The Corvan Empire controls 7,000 systems. We have 600. By every metric, this is an unwinnable war. President Chen stood slowly, her face carved from stone. Then we change the metrics. We don't fight to occupy territory. We don't fight for resources or political gain. We fight to end them. Complete extinction of their species. No mercy, no prisoners, no negotiations. The vote was unanimous. Within 24 hours, humanity entered what historians would later call the Fury Protocol. Every shipyard began emergency construction. Civilian factories were converted to military production. The entire economy shifted to support one goal: the complete annihilation of the Corvan Empire. Scientists who had been working on theoretical weapons were given unlimited resources. The Mars colonies volunteered their entire population for military service. Even the isolated Jupiter moon settlements sent their best pilots. Admiral Jessica Storm was pulled from retirement to lead humanity's response. She was 71 years old, scarred from the last human civil war and known for tactics that others called insane. She stood before the assembled fleet commanders, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun. The Corvan expect us to mass our fleets and meet them in glorious battle. We won't give them that satisfaction. We're going to fight dirty. We're going to fight smart. And we're going to make them beg for the mercy they denied our people. The first phase was intelligence gathering. Humanity deployed thousands of stealth probes throughout Corvan space, each one the size of a basketball and virtually undetectable. They mapped trade routes, counted ships, identified weaknesses. The Corvan Empire was vast but slow, dependent on established hyperspace lanes and massive supply chains. Their ships were powerful but required exotic matter fuel that came from only 3 systems. Their communication network relied on quantum relays that had to be physically maintained. Commander Marcus Chen, son of the president but earning his rank through merit, led the first strike team. His ship, the Ghost of Arcturus, was a new design built specifically for this war. It could run silent for months, invisible to every known sensor. His crew of 50 volunteers knew they probably wouldn't return. They painted the names of the Arcturus 7 victims on their hull. 12,000 names in letters too small to read, but there nonetheless. The Ghost struck a Corvan fuel depot in what the Empire considered a safe system. They waited in the shadow of a gas giant for 18 days, watching patrol patterns and learning routines. When they attacked, it was over in minutes. Antimatter charges destroyed the storage tanks while computer viruses corrupted the navigation databases. By the time the Corvan response fleet arrived, the humans were gone, leaving behind only a message in the debris. For Arcturus 7, the first of many, within 3 months humanity had hit 47 targets across Corvan space. Never military fleets, never defended positions. Always supply lines, fuel depots, communication relays. The Corvan grew frustrated, then angry. They pulled ships from frontier territories to guard their infrastructure. They demanded honorable battle, ship to ship, fleet to fleet. Humanity refused. Admiral Storm's response to their demands became famous. You showed no honor at Arcturus 7, you received none from us. The orphans of Arcturus 7 were housed on Mars, where they became symbols of humanity's rage. Lily Park, Thomas and Sarah's daughter, was interviewed on the anniversary of the attack. The 7-year-old looked directly into the camera and said words that would be painted on every human warship. They killed my mommy and daddy. Now we kill them back. The phrase became humanity's battle cry. Simple, childish, and absolutely terrifying in its pure conviction. The second phase began 6 months into the war. Humanity unveiled weapons that violated 3 different galactic treaties humanity had never signed. Nanoswarms that consumed Corvan ships from the inside out, gravity bombs that created temporary black holes, biological weapons tailored to Corvan physiology. The Empire screamed about war crimes, about rules of engagement. Admiral Storm's response was broadcast across the galaxy. You destroyed a mining colony full of families. There are no rules anymore. The Corvan made a critical error in the 8th month of the war. They attempted to repeat their Arcturus 7 strategy, attacking the human colony of New Mumbai. But humanity had learned. The colony was a trap, evacuated months ago and filled with antimatter mines. The Corvin fleet of 200 ships entered the system and found it empty except for a single message buoy. It broadcast a little girl's voice, Lily Park's voice, saying over and over, "You killed my mommy and daddy. Now we kill you back." The mines detonated simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that turned the entire system into a temporary star. 200 Corvin ships and 30,000 Corvin soldiers were vaporized instantly. The explosion was visible from 3 systems away, a funeral pyre that burned for weeks. The Corvin Empire, for the first time in its history, knew fear. They began pulling back, consolidating their forces around core systems, abandoning frontier territories they had held for millennia. But humanity wasn't interested in taking territory. Phase 3 had already begun. The stealth probes had found what Admiral Storm was looking for. The Corvin homeworld, hidden behind layers of defense and deception. It was a gas giant's moon, similar to Arcturus 7 in size but covered in vast cities holding billions of Corvin civilians. The Empire had made the mistake of centralizing their government there. Every major decision, every military command, everything flowed through the homeworld. Commander Marcus Chen led a fleet of 500 Ghost-class ships, each one carrying a special payload. They took 11 months to reach the Corvin homeworld, traveling through dead systems and abandoned hyperspace lanes. They arrived to find 10,000 Corvin ships defending the system, the largest fleet ever assembled. It didn't matter. The ghost ships weren't there to fight. They were there to deliver a message and a gift. The message was simple, broadcast on every frequency and every language the Corvin had ever encountered. You had a choice at Arcturus 7, you chose genocide. Now we choose the same. For the 12,000 you murdered, we take your 12 billion. This is justice. This is vengeance. This is humanity. The gift was 500 canisters of compressed strange matter, each one programmed to seek the gravitational center of the moon. They passed through the Corvin shields like they didn't exist. The Corvin had 6 minutes to contemplate their fate. Some tried to flee. Some begged for mercy. Some simply stood at their windows watching the strange matter begin to compress their world. The moon collapsed into itself. Billions of Corvin citizens compressed into a sphere the size of a small city. The gravitational effects destroyed every ship in orbit, every satellite, every space station. The Corvin Empire's heart was ripped out in less than 10 minutes, taking with it their entire government and military command. The remaining Corvin systems fell into chaos. Without central coordination, they turned on each other, fighting for resources and control. Within a year, the empire that had controlled 7,000 systems and destroyed hundreds of species ceased to exist. Humanity didn't conquer them. Humanity broke them so completely they conquered themselves. The survivors scattered, becoming refugees, begging for mercy from species they had once tried to exterminate. Admiral Storm retired immediately after the war, refusing all honors and medals. In her final public statement, she said something that would be debated for generations. "We didn't win a war. We committed genocide in response to genocide. We became monsters to defeat monsters. I pray our children never have to make the choice we made. But if they do, I pray they remember Arcturus 7, and they remember that sometimes the only response to absolute evil is absolute destruction." Lily Park grew up to become Earth's youngest ambassador. At age 27, she stood before the Galactic Council representing humanity's bid for membership. The other species were terrified of humans, knowing what they had done to the Corvin. Lily spoke softly, but every word carried the weight of 12,000 ghosts. "We are not warmongers. We are not conquerors. But we are not victims either. We offer friendship and trade to all who meet us in peace. To those who would harm our innocent, we offer only what you gave us first. Choose wisely. The galaxy chose peace. No species ever attacked a human colony again. The ruins of the Corvin homeworld became a pilgrimage site, where beings from across the galaxy came to see what happened when humanity was pushed too far. The memorial at Arcturus 7 bore a simple inscription that would echo through eternity. Here died 12,000 innocent humans. Here began the end of an empire. Here humanity learned that some sins cannot be forgiven, only avenged. Remember Arcturus 7. Remember what love and loss can drive a species to become.